a leading Democratic senator has taken an action that members of her own party don't often attempt so openly. She made her way across the border to Toronto, joined a Canadian television discussion, and cautioned the administration of Prime Minister Mark Carney. Her advice focused not on tensions with America, but rather on the need for vigilance regarding China. This senator is Elissa Slotkin, representing Michigan. With her background as a former CIA analyst, she stands out as a potential contender her party might look to for the 2028 presidential contest. Slotkin shared with Canadian audiences that despite the current strains and genuine difficulties in dealings with Washington, leaders in Ottawa would do well to proceed thoughtfully before expanding ties with Beijing. That's the surface-level message. Yet the deeper situation reveals something quite different. Just 4 months prior, the American president had publicly threatened to seriously damage Canada's economy should Carney pursue precisely such an agreement. He floated the idea of imposing a full 100% tariff. 100%. It represented the most aggressive tariff warning issued against a close ally in recent times. Now, 4 months later, that tariff remains absent. The agreement Carney reached in Beijing continues to move ahead. And in this context, a high-profile American Democrat appears in Toronto via Canadian media, gently urging Canada to take a more measured approach. In the coming moments, I'll explain precisely how this single trip and conversation reveal more about the evolving dynamics between Ottawa and Washington than any recent statements coming out of the White House. Let me walk you through the actual events. Senator Elissa Slotkin came to Toronto recently for the 2026 Global Progress Action Summit. This event brings together moderate progressive leaders from North America and Europe to explore common policy issues. Prime Minister Carney attended, along with various European officials. Notably, former President Barack Obama had given a major address in the city just days before. On Sunday, Slotkin sat for an in-depth interview on the CBC show Rosemary Barton Live. This is the type of extended conversation that draws significant attention among political circles in Ottawa, and her comments were thoughtfully crafted. She remarked to the interviewer something along the lines of understanding Canada's interest in exploring new directions and broadening its connections. That particular wording deserves close attention. Here was a current United States Senator appearing on Canadian airwaves and readily accepting that Canada is seeking opportunities beyond its traditional ties. Beyond its traditional ties to where? To the United States, of course. This aligns with the stance taken by the Carney government and was being echoed back to Canadians through an American elected official who appears to view it as the current reality. She went on to explain her message to Canadian decision-makers. Even as Washington has presented challenges lately, that doesn't automatically make Beijing a reliable choice when weighing matters of security and sovereignty. In simpler terms, the message acknowledges that the U.S. has created some complications in the relationship. Officials in Washington get why Canada is pursuing other avenues. Yet they advise picking those avenues with great care. Think about the implications here. This wasn't a stern lecture delivered from a place of unquestioned dominance. Instead, it came across more like an appeal based on an understanding of changed circumstances. An understanding that the long-standing expectation of Canada automatically aligning with U.S. positions no longer applies as it once did. And notably, this perspective wasn't voiced by President Trump or official State Department channels. It came from a Democratic senator traveling in what seemed a personal or party-related role. Slotkin specifically highlighted worries over electric vehicles produced in China. She pointed out how these cars are capable of gathering detailed three-dimensional imagery and location information. According to her, such information might find its way back to authorities in Beijing. Drawing on her intelligence experience, she framed this as an issue of national security rather than purely commercial concern. Together with a Republican colleague from Ohio, she has supported legislation aimed at completely prohibiting such vehicles from the U.S. market. Her stance remains steady across the board. What's particularly noteworthy is the manner in which she conveyed these points while on Canadian territory and addressing Canadian viewers. She used a respectful, concerned tone instead of issuing orders. In her words, roughly, the United States isn't comfortable seeing Canada open its doors to these Chinese vehicles, as it's not a direction America wants to take. She added that the two countries seem to be diverging on key international commerce matters in ways they haven't for quite some time. Coming from an influential American lawmaker, that represents a remarkable concession. The economic links between Canada and the United States form one of the most closely interwoven partnerships globally, stretching back decades. Billions in trade flow across the border daily, with nearly 3.6 billion Canadian dollars worth of goods and services exchanged every day. Canada supplies about 60% of America's ordered crude oil and 85% of its electricity imports. It also leads as the biggest external provider of steel, aluminum, and uranium to the American economy. Against this backdrop, a senator hailing from Michigan, right in the center of the U.S. automotive sector, is now openly admitting that the two nations find themselves at odds on important trade questions. Now, keep all these details in mind when considering the recent actions by Mark Carney, especially given how the timing plays out. Back on January 16th of 2026, Carney visited Beijing for discussions with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The resulting announcement described a fresh strategic collaboration between the two nations. Carney's team highlighted the significant possibilities China offers for Canadian interests. The pact involves Beijing reducing duties on Canadian exports like canola, lobster, peas, and various farm goods. In return, Canada agreed to ease its previous tariffs on electric vehicles from China. Previously, Canada had followed the American lead with a 100% duty on those vehicles. That barrier has now been lifted. The updated terms permit as many as 49,000 Chinese-built electric vehicles to enter the Canadian market annually under a low most favored nation rate of just 6.1%. 49,000 vehicles at 6.1% instead of 100. That's the immediate news, but the broader impact runs much deeper. Additionally, Carney set an ambitious goal for Canada to boost its exports to China by 50% by the year 2030. 50%. During his initial addresses following his rise to liberal leadership and success in the spring 2026 election, Carney informed Canadians that several traditional advantages, those connected to the tight economic bonds with America, had started to turn into vulnerabilities. He noted that the United States has undergone changes, requiring Canada to adapt accordingly. He emphasized that Canada could no longer depend exclusively on a single overseas partner while seeking out fresh commercial links. That idea of moving beyond reliance on just one key partner stands as perhaps the most significant idea in Canadian international relations in recent years. Throughout the history of contemporary Canada, the response to who represents the primary partner has always pointed in one direction: Washington. Now Carney is signaling that this may no longer be the case. The initial tangible evidence of this new direction appeared on May 7, 2026, when a Geely-owned Lotus company dispatched 18 Chinese-manufactured Electra SUVs from Shanghai to Canadian shores. Though only 18 units, they marked the beginning. This shipment opens a pathway that, per the agreement, could accommodate up to 49,000 such vehicles yearly. Consider the powerful imagery involved. The initial delivery of automobiles from a manufacturer with Chinese state connections, docking in North America, following a pact inked by Canada's leader, occurred just days ahead of the American senator's arrival in Toronto. With her measured words of caution, the order of events is crucial. The vehicles arrived ahead of the senator's visit. The American reaction appears to be trailing behind the Canadian moves rather than directing them. This represents a fundamental reversal from the way Washington has traditionally viewed and managed its relationship with Canada over the last 6 decades. This brings us to an intersection of developments that ought to give pause to those who thought the American approach under Trump toward Canada was achieving its goals. Roughly 4 months back, on January 24th of 2026, the U.S. President shared a statement on his social media channel that in previous periods might have sparked an outright diplomatic emergency. He indicated that any agreement between Canada and China would result in an immediate 100% tariff on all Canadian imports entering the United States. He used the term governor for the Canadian Prime Minister, echoing the dismissive language applied to Carney's predecessor. The president claimed China would essentially consume Canada entirely. He cautioned against Canada turning into what he called a drop-off point for Chinese products aimed at the American consumer base. That message came on January 24th. Today is May 11th. No such sweeping tariff has been enacted. Not only does the Beijing arrangement remain in place, but the first deliveries have landed. Carney hasn't faced a forced binary choice between Washington and Beijing. In practical terms, he has engaged with both without suffering notable consequences up to this point. Now let's contrast the approaches. The president's was an open warning that failed to be carried out. The senator's was a courteous televised suggestion that Canada reconsider its path. Each serves as a form of response, yet one reflects the stance of a dominant power making demands, while the other shows an ally attempting to mend connections that the dominant power may have strained. Slotkin touched on this dynamic during her appearance. She noted the difficulties in Canada-U.S. relations but mentioned that a number of prominent American figures still value the bilateral links. That observation captures the transformation neatly in just a few words. There remain a number of key American politicians who value the ties. A number, not everyone. Not necessarily those in the current administration, just several. The baseline expectations have shifted noticeably. 12 months ago, Canadian thinking presumed America as the essential ally that Ottawa needed to navigate carefully around Trump. Currently, the view holds America as merely one option among others, with U.S. warnings proving manageable, and Carney's strategy of spreading out partnerships showing positive results, at least initially. These aren't abstract calculations. Canada serves as the leading export market for 36 U.S. states. It provides 60% of American crude oil imports and 85% of electricity needs from abroad. This interdependence operates mutually, and Carney appears to be the initial prime minister in many years to operate on the basis that Ottawa fully grasps this balance of influence. At the same time, the framework for continental commerce faces an important upcoming examination. The trade pact linking Canada, the United States, and Mexico, referred to as CUSMA, north of the border and USMCA in the States, faces its mandated review by July 1st of 2026, which is under 2 months away. According to relevant provisions, the participating countries need to determine if they will renew the agreement for an additional 16 years. Should any side opt against renewal, it triggers yearly assessments that could extend toward the pact's end date in 2036 if issues persist. U.S. representatives, such as Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, have indicated that talks won't conclude in time for the July deadline. Greer has stated straightforwardly that adjustments will be necessary. The American ambassador in Canada, Pete Hora, has noted that views among Canadians are divided, with many either indifferent to continuing the deal or openly against it. This, too, marks a notable change. Half a decade ago, the notion of Canada potentially stepping back from its trade arrangement with America would have seemed impossible. Nowadays, it's an active topic of discussion within Canadian political circles. The big unknowns remain unanswered in public by either side. Will Carney participate in the July 1st discussions and agree to the long-term extension? Might the president step away from the 100% tariff idea he hasn't managed to implement? Could the flow of Chinese electric vehicles grow from those initial 18 to thousands more, reaching the full quota as Washington observes and issues further notices? Or might Senator Slotkin's understated journey to Toronto signal the beginning of a wider shift? Perhaps Democrats realizing that the current U.S. strategy toward Canada hasn't delivered the expected influence, meaning a return to conventional partnership handling would demand a thorough reassessment of Washington's expectations from Ottawa. So far, the Carney team shows no signs of backing away. Chinese vehicles continue to make their way in. The goal of expanding exports to China by half remains firm. In Ottawa, engagement with Beijing gets presented not as disloyalty to the United States, but rather as a necessary broadening of options. This is seen as a standard move for a nation of Canada's stature that has heard repeatedly, and quite publicly, that its longtime close partner no longer views the connection as uniquely important. Slotkin's time in Toronto was framed around a gathering of center-left thinkers and leaders. It certainly fulfilled that purpose, yet it carried additional weight. This marked perhaps the initial occasion throughout the current trade tensions, where a notable U.S. political figure traveled across the border, faced Canadian cameras directly, and in essence recognized that Canada now possesses genuine choices. Choices that cannot simply be dismissed or blocked through online statements from an American social media account. This constitutes an important acknowledgement, and once such an acknowledgement enters the public record, withdrawing it becomes extremely challenging. The earlier threats conveyed one perspective. This visit communicates something quite different. And within that difference lies the emerging nature of Canada-United States relations. It may be less dramatic than daily news coverage suggests, yet more enduring and difficult to undo than many in Washington appear prepared to accept. If this analysis is bringing you insights or angles you haven't encountered in other coverage, please pass it along to others. Leave your perspectives and reactions below in the comments section, because I'm eager to engage with them. Give the video a thumbs up if you'd like to see additional content in this style, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.